Oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm doing this after 75 years. I'm coming to you from the land of the Gitchen. I'm from the house of Ale in Kispiox, and Gitchen literally means people of the Skeena, or what we know as the Skeena today. For thousands of years, it was called Xien. Xien. And my knowledge of we call it Wethan Eilach, the old language, is that clouds are called yen or yen. And when we say yen, we're speaking about all the moisture that comes from the clouds. And Imbert Orchard referred to the moisture as cloud waters. So here I am on the banks of the Skeena River, and it's like a journey that began not far from here on the Nass River. I come from the little village of Kitkatla, which is Tsimshian, which literally means in the rain or in the cloud waters. And I was born in 1946, so 75 years ago. And in 1955, my family decided to move from the little village of Kitkatla to Hazelton. So I arrived here on the Skeena River in this magic, incredible place, a land of cottonwood trees and the incredible river that I knew from a child fishing on the mouth of the Skeena River, fishing sockeye every summer. And I had the joy of spending my time with my grandfather, who was a storyteller, and he would teach me everything about nature and how to look at the water, how to understand what the moons are doing. So when I came to Hazelton in 1955, there were many things happening at that time. Imbert Orchard was in the area. I was a paper boy for the Vancouver Sun, and I delivered 2-day-old papers that came up on the train from Vancouver. And I delivered papers to people that Imbert Orchard was actually interviewing. And one of them was Art Hankin. And when I heard the tapes of Art Hankin's voice, all of these decades later, it was little Roy, the paper boy, who couldn't believe that he was hearing Art Hankin again. So my connection to Imbert Orchard and what he was doing is tied in so many ways. And each year I learn another way that we were connected. When my family moved here, I was 9 years old and I decided to go into Boy Scouts. And I wound up being the troop leader. And we spent our time out on the land. So it was like Boy Scouts in Hazelton was like following the teachings of my grandfather, only in a different way. And so my relationship to the land continued. And then I discovered horses that were in the area, and I rode for this rancher who had these beautiful race horses. And at the age of 16, I decided I was going away to residential school in Alberta. I decided myself. And it wasn't a government residential school, I'm happy to say. And I turned 17 there and caught up to my family who had moved to Victoria. Well, I was happy to be back home with my family, or back with my family, but I wasn't home. I wasn't on the Skeena River. And so for years in Victoria, I just had a heartache for the Skeena River and Hazelton. And during my time at Oak Bay High School, I came across discrimination at the age of 17 for the first time in my life. And I didn't know what it was. When I found out what it was, this guy thought that all Indians were lazy, and I laughed. He thought that all Indians were drunks, and I laughed even harder. He thought that all Indians lived on welfare. And I just all of a sudden realized, well, these poor people in this big city, in this big school who's supposed to be teaching so much, they don't know anything. They don't even know what a Simshan is. They don't know where the Skeena River is. And so my art teacher helped me to connect with the museum. And I met Wilson Duff, who was the curator of the BC Provincial Museum before it became the Royal BC Museum. I met all of the people down there who were working on building the new museum. And I began my studies, and I thought it was so weird that to study my father's people, I had to go to a museum, not a library. There was nothing in the Victoria Public Library in those days, no books on Indigenous people. And in one of my visits there, Wilson Duff finally saw this young man, and he came up to me and introduced himself. And he said, "You come here quite often. I notice you love this place." I said, "Yes, this place reminds me in many ways of my home in northern BC. I used to go and sit in the trapper's cabin that was part of the museum. And I'd sit on a stump that was in the cabin, just like my grandpa's trapper's cabin. And furs were hanging on the walls. And I just sit there, full of memories of home in the North Country." And when I told Wilson of this, he said, "So what is your name?" "Well, it's Roy Henry Vickers." "Henry Vickers, the Vickers. And where are you, Bella Bella?" "Well, Henry was, but no, I'm Kit Catholic." And so his eyes, I could see the excitement, and he said, "Well, come into my office. I want to show you something." And he went over to this filing cabinet and pulled out a manila folder, went to his desk, and he opened it, and he held up a picture to me. And he said, "Do you know this man?" And I looked at it and I thought, he looks really familiar, but no, I don't know him. And he said, "Well, this is Amos Collinson. He was your grandmother's father." And that little meeting set a fire under me to learn that continues to this day, and it will burn till I don't breathe anymore. So my knowledge of the North and my grandpa, Henry Vickers, kept me connected. I would go back north every summer to go fishing with my grandfather, and then I'd come back to Victoria to go to school. And when I was with my grandpa, listening to his stories, they reminded me of something. In one of my trips to the museum, this magazine came out. And when I saw it, I thought, oh my goodness, that was my introduction to Imbert Orchard, because all of the magazines had a little cassette tape that came with them. And this homesick for the Skeena Roy would walk the streets of Victoria with his little cassette deck, listening to all of these voices. And the voices I knew. I heard the people speaking with my own ears when I lived in Hazelton. So the tie to the North was kept strong in me. And I listened to those tapes over and over and over and over. And the years went by, and all of my studies in those days, as Lara said, set me on this course as an artist. And as I look back at it now, as a senior person, as an elder and keeper of the knowledge, it's like everybody that I met and everyone I got to spend time with were preparing me to be the artist that I've been for 45 years. So, Imbert Orchard, well, it's like I knew the man. And I suspect we crossed paths a number of times when he was up in this country, because I was a young man who was speaking to the same people he was. As the years went by and I grew as an artist, I continually came back to the Skeena River, back to Hazelton. I'd walk up on the graveyard grounds, which is a step above the village of Hazelton. And I'd walk through the graves and see these beautiful carvings. And it wasn't until I got to a place where I wanted those tapes. I'd long ago lost my cassettes. Now I'm back in Hazelton and I'm talking to people about this man, Imbert Orchard. Well, do you know him? Have you heard his tapes? He interviewed Martin Starrett and all of the old timers, and nobody knew the tapes. So I thought, all right, they've got to be somewhere. And I called the museum and they directed me to the archives. And there was a young man there who didn't know the tapes. And I called a few times. And finally, I got impatient. And I said, well, listen, your job is to have this information for people like me. So please, can you please find those tapes? They're here. And he said, well, I'll get back to you. And he called back finally and he said, well, I can't really help you with those tapes, but I know who can. His name is Robert Budd, and he owns a company called Memories to Memoirs. So I got his phone number and called him, and that's how I met Lucky. I mean, that's what he calls himself, and that's the way I've always known him. And I said, Lucky, I have been looking for tapes at Imbert Orchard recorded from people in Hazelton, in this whole North Country, everybody associated with the Skeena River, and I can't find them. And Lucky just said, well, yep, I can find them. I know them all. I've listened to thousands of hours of his, I've listened to everything he did. I know what you want. And then he got on a sidetrack and he said, so Roy Henry Vickers, is anyone doing your biography? And I kind of did a step back and said to him, well, I'm not old enough to have a biography done. And he said very sweetly, well, aren't you collecting your old age pension? I said, oh yeah, I am. Well, don't you think your story should be written down? Look at the difference that Imbert Orchard's stories made. I think we should record your story. I think we should I'll do your biography. I said, well, it's quite a personal thing, so I'd really like to meet you and get to know you and see if we hit it off. So he traveled to Tofino, where I was, met him there at a storytelling. We hit it off right away. It was crazy because I met him at coffee at the Wicked Inn one morning. And as we went in there for coffee, I had friends from Smithers who had just flown into Vancouver and went straight to Tofino. And I was visiting them, and when Lucky walked in, he looks at them both and he sees Tizia, my friend, and he walks over to her and gives her a big hug. And I'm like, what the heck? And they were friends from their teenage years in Toronto. So again, it's like all of these things come together and our lives are intertwined with so many other people. And when we put ourselves out there, we discover this incredible world that just keeps unfolding and keeps unfolding and keeps unfolding, and inspirations coming from everywhere for me as an artist. And so Lucky and I hit it off, and he started recording storytelling sessions. And what he did, after they were done and everybody was gone, he's just about bouncing off the walls of the gallery. We have books here. We have books here, Roy. And I'm looking at him like he's a little crazy. And finally I said, well, I'm a storyteller, and those stories that I tell in the gallery, I tell them the way they've been told for thousands of years. Yes, but if we could put them in books, there are hundreds of thousands of people who could get to see and read the stories that will never hear them from you. And that's it. That's how, when you said several books, I went, let's see, 11 books, 10 or 11 books later. And so the journey goes on. And through all of the books, we did a series of books on the legends. And then we did a series of children's books, which is ongoing. The last one just came out this year called A is for Anemone. And it's the first West Coast alphabet. So it's all about the coast and the names like anemone. And I chose anemone for the first one because I could never pronounce it properly. And most of the people I knew couldn't pronounce it properly. And I met someone who finally said, well, if you think any money, anemone. And so I've been able to pronounce it ever since. So I wanted that to be the first A in the book. And so life continues, and there are more books to come. And all of this comes from the magic of the Skeena and the incredible foresight, inquisitiveness that this man, Imbert Orchard, had. So today, living here on the river, I can hear old Chief Johnson. So how I learned about the river was from recording by Imbert Orchard. I can hear people telling stories that I had long forgotten, and they're all coming back to me. And it's like, at my age, I'm looking at it and thinking, well, if I live 25 more years, more stories are going to come. And today, here's another thing that happened. Today, I was telling my in-laws about Cataline's gravesite. And I spoke earlier at the gravesite in Hazelton. Well, Cataline's gravesite, he wanted no name put on it. So there's a pile of rock cemented together, and that's where the famous Cataline is buried, on an Indian reserve. That's how he was accepted in the community. No discrimination. He was part of the people. And I thought, well, it would really be nice to put a grave marker over Cataline's marker or his pile of stones. So that's something I'm moved to do today, and who knows when I can get to do it. But I see him sitting on his mule, and Cataline was, his mule train and the way he was a packer in this country is famous. If he was an American, he'd be like Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone, and everybody would know him. And in BC, let alone Canada, hardly anybody knows him. And I just think his story should be told. He was a Catalonian man who moved to Canada and became famous in the North Country. And the trails that he used for his mule train to pack supplies, he learned from all of the First Nations, from your Kamloops, where mile 0 is, just out of Cache Creek. He learned all of those trails, and that's how he moved. Today, those trails are highways. People should know how those highways got to be, how people learned where to put the roads. So for me, Lucky and I finally got to this place with the books One day we were talking as we always do, and I said, you know what? We should, we should, we should put a book together of Cataline stories from the Skeena. And I said, you know, I live on the Skeena. When I go to sleep at night, I open my window and I listen to the river. And there are a few nights when my wife has said, there's somebody out there. I listen, can hear voices, but you can't hear what they're saying. I said, oh, well, no, there's nobody there, but there's voices. Yes, there's voices, but I think they're voices from the past. And I think what we should do is just be comfortable with them. Well, are you sure there's nobody out there? Yes, I'm sure there's no one out there. And so for me, that's how voices came to me, voices from the Skeena, because I've heard them. I've heard songs, I've heard people. So we decided to do this book, and for me to illustrate the book, helped by the BC Archives. So I would look through the stories and say, okay, we need photographs of Cataline. All right, we need the Hazelton, we need the Inlander, we need the Port Simpson, we need old photographs of Port Simpson, and on and on and on. And like he goes, okay, I know how we can find those. And that's how the book came to be. And when we finished the book, I looked at it, and again, it was one of those things that you can't believe that you're a part of, or you feel very humbled to be a part of such a beautiful group of stories. Now I'll leave you with this. Inspiration comes from the word inspiritus in Latin, and it literally means the breath of God respirating us. And it comes through the frontal cortex of our brain, where our emotions and our creativity rests. I can feel it. When it happens for me, all the hair goes up on the back of my neck, and I can feel energy go right to my fingertips. And that's what I work with. And every time I'm finished doing something like Voices from the Skeena, it's like it's greater than the sum of its parts. It's greater than me, it's greater than Lucky, it's greater than Imbert Orchard, it's greater than all of those people. It's all of us and all of our ancestors coming together to make something happen. And that's what inspiration does. And so I was inspired to know that we were going to do this, and I was going to be able to tell some stories about my life here on the Skeena River, on Xian, and share it with people. So I feel blessed, and I'm so thankful that I've had the time to share these stories with you, to know that there's now another way that those stories will be able to go out to people, and they can hear them again, and perhaps be inspired to go and find the book and look at the back of the book and find the connection to Imbert Orchard and his recordings, because they are so powerful. And there's so much of power that began in this, our newest province of Canada. And what better time for it all to happen than when we finally come to a place where we are all acknowledging Indigenous people, Indigenous lands. And that's where we live. So we're connected to those cultures, like my village that existed for over 5,000 years prior to contact. So we as British Columbians and anyone else in the world that wants to be connected can be connected. You connect to the land, you connect to the ancestors, you connect to the spirits that are still here on the land. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roy, on behalf of all of us for sharing your story and your story of the Skeena and how this is all interconnected.
Yeah.
We now have time for some questions, and Jesse is going to moderate those questions in the chat.
Thanks, Lara, and thanks, Roy. And just before I say more, we'll be doing a Q&A via the chat box. So if you have questions, please just type them into your chat, and I'll read them to Roy so he's not having to look at that and answer questions at the same time. But yeah, first I wanted to take another moment and just thank you so much, Roy, for sharing your well, first of all, for the book, pointing to my copy here on the table, and for shining the spotlight both on that region of the province around the Skeena, and also this really incredible collection of recordings at the BC Archives. And for people who are able to come to Victoria and visit it, it's really worth coming in and sitting at the computers where they have digital files and listening to some of those stories. They cover the entire province. There's something like 1,000 people in there. It's just an incredible resource. Yeah, so if people have questions, please pop them into the chat. And the other thing I wanted to say, Royce, I thought you did really beautifully was just capture how this incredible way in which stories are passed down over many decades. That somebody who had talked to Cataline, this famous packer in the north when he was a child, and then speaks to the CBC this radio producer in the 60s, and then you're encountering these stories 10 years later as a youth, and then developing into this book. So there's amazing passing down of stories, and of course the archives plays an important part of that, and so grateful to also be shedding light on that. Somebody wants to see the book on my desk. There you are. You can see some beautiful pictures there. Yeah, so maybe Roy, one question. Oh yeah, go ahead. Do you have something to say?
Oh, okay, you're quick. This morning we were sitting over breakfast talking about this, and somewhere I read about there was a conjecture, including Imbert, about Cataline and where that name came from. We know he was Catalonian, and some people thought, well, that's where it came from, but it didn't make sense. And there is nothing that anybody said that really convinced me that for the reason where the name came from. And voices from the Skeena? Well, one day I was standing on the graveyard site overlooking Hazelton and looking at the mountain we call Stygiodin, called Rocher de Bull today. And I could picture the Hazelton coming around the corner and people screaming and hollering, steamboat, steamboat, and people running all over the place. And I don't know why, but it popped into my mind about Cataline being there to pick up supplies to take them somewhere else in the province in northern BC. And I heard him, because I'm a horseman, working with pack trains of horses, I heard him say, "Get in line!" And I thought, okay, with his accent, maybe that's where his name came from, because he said it over and over and over and over every day, all over the province. So now I'm convinced that Cataline came from Jean Co was his name, hollering, "Get in line, you mules." Yeah.
And on that topic, sort of, Beverly is wondering how you've heard animals and birds speak in their way along the river. I guess those other voices that.
Oh, well, I'm an eagle. Every place I've been, eagles have come to me. I was a shy young man. I was a shy, middle-aged man up to the age of 45. When I was asked to do something like this, I would just say, oh no, picture's worth 1,000 words. I'm an artist. You look at my pictures if you want to know what I have to say. Well, one day I was on my boat with my little boy, who's not a little boy anymore. And we were coming into this bay in the fog. And the fog was maybe 150 feet above us. And William saw this eagle coming down out of the fog. And he said, look, Dad, there's an eagle. And I'm looking, trying to see where it is. And I didn't see anything. Its wings were outspread and it was just gliding straight towards us. And it went over the boat and I did this. And the eagle banked really hard and turned around and came back to the boat. And as it did, a feather fell. And I got underneath the feather and went to grab it and missed. And it landed on my chest. A few days later, I'm thinking about this and what happened and why did this. I don't believe in circumstances. When you're centered in the strength and truth and beauty of who you are meant to be, things happen for a reason. So it's up to us to be the teacher and learn what that reason is. And so I just put it out there. What was that about? And the answer was this quick. It's time for you to speak. You know that the feather is passed from one person to the next in a talking circle. And when you're holding the feather, it's time for you to speak. And I thought, no, not me. And the message came again in my head. You know, it's time for you to speak. So I thought, okay, if I'm asked to speak, I will go and speak. That was on a Tuesday. By the end of the week, the art teachers of British Columbia were meeting and they asked that I come and be the keynote speaker to all of these art teachers. And I thought, well, what am I going to tell them? I was petrified that I was going to have to stand up in front of teachers and speak. And when I asked the question, well, what am I going to talk about? Well, who was your best teacher? Mr. West, my art teacher. So tell them about you and your art teacher. So I did. And I've been speaking ever since. So I don't interpret what eagles say or ravens or whales, but I know that they're there for a reason, to teach me something, because that's what my grandfather taught me. You pay attention. You pay attention. Listen. Listen with your heart, not with your ears. You feel what's going on and you'll figure it out. And I always have. Good question.
Thanks, Roy, and thanks, Beverly, for the question. And Kathy was wondering if there are voices from Cedarvale in your book. So how does Cedarvale appears?
Goodness. Oh, every time I go to the coast. So when I head down the Skeena, if I'm going to Terrace to do some shopping, once I get to Cedarvale, I know that I'm going through a door. And Cedarvale, I don't know who called it Cedarvale, but its name is Mien Skenist. And in the little sign there, it's Mien Skenish. And that's the way non-Indigenous people interpreted the word. But Mien is at the bottom of something, and Skenist is mountains. So the ancient name for the village that has been there for who knows, way, way before recorded history, is at the bottom of the mountains. So every time I go through Cedarvale, I know that I'm going to be seeing no more birch trees going to the coast, because birch can't live in really, really wet climate. So I'm now going from Gitxsan country to Tsimshian country, to coast country. So Cedarvale, Mien Skenist has always been a very special place, always, every time I drive through there. Good one.
And there's a question from Robert about some previous prints you've done in the past of the face of Christ, or face of Jesus. And if you could share a bit about your inspiration there.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that's a different question for Voices from the Skeena, but yeah, Voices from God. I grew up in Kitcala. There's one church in the village, and that church is the High Church of England, an Anglican church. So I grew up with the teachings of the church, with the rules and regulations of the church. And as a student of Indigenous cultures, I came to realize that our people, we call God Sun Oiget Tsunlacha, the chief of the heavens. Another word we have is Winaguado Tsunlacha, my big father in the sky. So I came to understand that the Christian people and the church who came here assumed ignorantly that they were speaking to people who knew nothing about God. And so it's a great pleasure to answer your question and to share with you that our people lived close to the Creator, as we speak of the Creator all of the time. So it was easy for me to move from not a hatred, but a very strong dislike for the church, because the two churches that were the most prevalent in the genocide of my father's people were the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church. So I had to come to grips somehow with all of these teachings that are part of one side of me, and all of these teachings that are part of the other side of me, and put them all together. And when I first did the Face of Christ, I was living in Victoria, and I was so excited, I took it into a Christian bookstore there to sell some of the prints. And I saw the disgust on their faces. And I was shocked. I thought, well, I don't get that. And then I realized, no, that's part of the religious teachings that this art is heathen. To me, inspiration, right, comes from the breath of God. So if an artist is creating something that they're inspired to do, where it comes from the same place. So for me, we're all one. We're all tied together. And we are spirit. So when I'm gone in a few years, part of me will remain. And with this kind of technology, of course, there's a lot more that's going to remain. But the message for me is that we are all one. We all have a connection to each other. And even science has proved today that if we trace our matrilineal genes, all of us go back to one gene called the mitochondrial gene. And we were all black. I love telling the story. And as we grew from that, it's called the Eve gene as well. So as I learn that and look at people, I look at the world in a completely different way today. I look at us as family. We're all in this canoe together, making this journey. And the canoe is Mother Earth.
Thanks, Roy. One question I had was how you and Robert Budd Lucky went about sorting through the many hours of audio recordings from that region of the province and selecting them. I mean, there's actually, you've had to condense quite a bit to fit them into the book.
Yes.
So how did you go about doing that? And how did you know which ones to include and which ones to not include?
Well, first you go from inspiration. And so what Lucky thought was, all right, if we choose all of the stories that you listened to that moved you so strongly, you're going to be able to create images, because obviously you've seen the images for decades and decades and 5 decades. So that's how we went. We just went with feelings, chose what we felt really strongly about, and it worked. It's a good one. There are many missed. We still want to do Billy Miner, the cowboy one. There's a couple of other stories, outlaws and cowboys. Simon Gunanoot, the longest manhunt in history. Billy Miner, the train robber. There's so many.
So maybe there's going to be a sequel, perhaps.
Yeah.
We'd certainly like that. If anybody has other questions, please pop them into the chat. But another one I would love to hear you speak more about, Roy, is just your approach to taking these audio files, which don't have images attached to them, right, as audio files, and then how did you turn them into images? And you spoke a little bit about working with some archival materials as well, so maybe you could just share a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, it goes back to Cedarvale. There was one about Father Tomlinson's church, and the story is so good. There's a city that was named the Holy City, and our First Nations peoples have a very great gift of music. When I was a child in the village of Kitkatla, everybody played some kind of musical instrument. The marching bands that existed as a child in this area were huge, and they would have contests in Prince Rupert, Fort Simpson, Metlakatla, Kitkatla, Ianch, marching bands from Hazelton, all went to compete there. So when I heard about, I said, well, I have to do something with Cedarvale or Mianskanish, because it's a pivotal point in the environment where the weather changes from inland weather to coastal weather. And you see more alder trees because it's so wet. I said, what do we have? And he said, well, that story about the lady, Constance Cox, and she's telling about they dropped their rakes and they dropped everything and they ran and they jumped over the fence and they went out on the sandbar and to look at the steamboat coming in. I said, okay, well, what do we have? Well, Father Tomlinson's church was there. I said, okay, well, do we have any photographs? Do we have anything? And it was a real struggle. This one was one of the most difficult images to bring together. But what I wanted was an image of Mianskanish that could go into the book. And so I went down there, but I'm just this little guy trying to get a photograph of this big, big place. And I didn't have a drone that could lift up and go and take pictures. So of all places, I went on to Google Earth, and that was my drone. And I went down and I knew that Mianskanish meant the bottom of the mountains. So I just looked at a 360-degree circle and I found the image I wanted. Lucky found the beautiful old log church. So the image is a modern day image of the land and the mountains, and the church, which is no longer there, is a ghosted image in the sky. And that's how that one came together. So many things. I used to sit with an old man, Ward Marshall, who lived to be 100 years old. Another friend of mine, Neil Starrett, lived to be 106. And I would sit with them and talk with them and listen to their stories over and over and over. And they would talk about those early days in Hazelton. There was no power, nothing like there is today. Ward Marshall had the first car that came into Hazelton, and it was a hearse. And he had this place where he took care of dead bodies. And Neil Starrett, well, he was related to Martin Starrett, who Imbert Orchard, many of his stories are about. So much of my relationship to these people and the stories they told were ingrained in my consciousness, subconsciousness. When I listen to people talk and tell stories or try to explain something, I see pictures in my mind. And then I interpret what those pictures mean to me and what the words that the person is communicating with mean to me, because everybody has something, some sort of gift for you. So that's the way I work with images, is pay attention to what I see. Like my grandpa telling me, Roy, look, pay attention to what you see. I used to be with him on the boat and he'd say, so what do you see out there? Oh, I see the ocean and the sky and the mountains and the trees. And he'd do this. Look again and tell me what you see. So here's Roy looking again going, okay, so obviously I missed something. So I'd look at the sky. Oh, it's blowing westerly. Clouds are moving to the east and the tide's running out. Oh, good. You see more now. You understand what I'm talking about when I ask you what you see? You look, you pay attention. So those lessons came to young Roy and prepared me to look in a different way, not only at the images that I see, but what they're related to and who they're related to. There are two things. When we communicate with each other, we're coming from a place, hopefully, that's deep inside us, that's our truth and what we want to share with people. And the other is our relationship to the land. And so when I put all that together, it comes out in whatever the image is that I create.
That's beautiful. I've got another question from Beverly here, just talking about how certain kinds of she's saying intellectual property by songs and stories might be seen as not things that would be shared necessarily with Indigenous peoples, that they might be the property of a family or seen as belonging to a particular family. So just wondering if there were your thoughts on intellectual property. What kind of stories are appropriate to be shared, maybe which ones that are better left unshared or shared in smaller groups? I'm rephrasing that question. Hopefully that's okay, Beverly.
That's a good one, Beverly. For me, any story that I share is meant to be shared. Songs that are intellectual property are learned by hundreds of singers on the coast, that they always have. And the songs are stories. And the songs are meant to be shared. So the only way that we have survived for thousands and thousands of years prior to contact was through stories. Potlatches are held, songs are sung, stories are told. You go hunting and you go fishing and you learn something when you're out there, and you come back and you sit around the fire and you tell your story. Why? Well, so someone else can learn. So the property part of it is, when I go to sing a song, I introduce the song. This is where this song comes from. We don't know how old the song is. It's thousands of years old. The song is meant to be shared. When you share this song, when I sing this song with you, I'm giving it to you. What we experience becomes part of us. That's the truth of life. So you experience my stories or my song, then they become part of you. When you go to tell them, to honor the gift, all you do is say, I was sitting down with Roy and he told me this story. And I love this story, so I'm going to tell it to you. And that's the gift of acknowledging a gift from someone else. I gift the storyteller that gave the story to me by gifting it to someone else. So it's all in the way we give and the humility we share when we give. It's good. That's part of our culture. That's part of storytelling around the world.
Yeah, it's a good question.
It is.
Thomas thanks you for an amazing presentation and is wondering how long it takes to finish a painting or the prints in the book. Yeah.
That varies. Sometimes it can be 3 days. Sometimes it can be 6 years. 6 years. There was one image that I did called Getting My Spirit Back, and I instantly knew what I wanted to do. So I started to do it. And then I got to a place where I didn't know how to finish the painting of the angel or of the person with wings. It was actually a warrior, eagle warrior. I didn't know how to finish the painting. And so it sat and waited and waited and waited. And time went by and I did all of this other work. One day I'm in the gallery and this lady comes in and she's looking at all of the different pictures, and I always let people alone and let them experience and just watch every once in a while to see if they want to speak. And I always go up to them quite shyly or respectful of their space and ask if I can help them. Well, this lady, all she wanted to do was talk to me. And as we spoke about different things like this, she said, have you ever thought of painting the human body covered in feathers? And boom, there it was. Instantly, I saw how to finish this painting. And 2 days later, it was done. So sometimes it comes very quickly and other times it comes slowly, slowly, slowly over time. And I never get frustrated with it. I know that if it's meant to be, it's going to come together sooner or later. And it always does. Good question.
We have a comment from Genevieve here, who's an archivist at the BC Archives. So thanks, Genevieve, for joining. And she says, I love the way you just describe hearing stories and turning them into pictures. So beautiful. She says, we are often asked at the archives, what kind of people use the archives and for what purpose? Do you mind if we add you to our list of interesting examples?
I would be honored. I would be completely honored. Yes. Yeah.
We probably have time for maybe one or two more questions if people have any more burning questions on their mind. Yeah, I wonder if you could say more about, and one thing I noticed reading the book was images are often showing, sometimes pioneers clearing the land. I can't remember the woman who was the first person to homestead in British Columbia, I believe, and these paddle wheelers coming up the river. But there's often these little, it's in the trees or in the moon, these indigenous designs sort of subtly in the background, but they're a presence. So I wanted to ask you about that too, Roy, about just the way that the book sort of brings together, even in these oral history excerpts where they might be focusing on the sort of the pioneer story, there's still this presence that comes through in your the prints in the book. So I wonder if you could talk about that and what your thoughts were there.
Good one, really good. It's always a mystery to me how pieces come together and how you get something done. And I always rely on inspiration to do something. And if it's something that I can't explain, or if it's a spirit or a thought, then I will ghost an image on the land or in a tree or in the sky. And that image represents the background or the relationship we have to the land. So there's a truth that we should all know as human beings. We don't have dominion. We are not bosses of the land. We are the land. We are what when this turns to the earth, it becomes the earth. My body decomposes and adds to the land. I am your brother. I am your sister. I'm part of my mom. You know, there's a female part of me that I acknowledge. It's probably what makes me the gentleman. So my ancestors' DNA runs through the blood that feeds my body and keeps me alive. Their actual physical DNA is part of you. They are part of the land. Ashes to ashes and dust to dust. So you are part of the land because you're part of them, they're part of you. So if we can always stay connected to that truth, then we will always have respect for what we call our mother, the earth. She feeds us. She gives us medicine from the plants that grow. So if we always take care of her, she will always take care of us. When I was a young man and began to learn that I was Tsimshian, Heiltsuk, Haida, and now I carry Tlaquagila. There's a headdress behind me here. That's the headdress of Tlaquagila, who is one of the chiefs of the House of Wakas from Owakino in Rivers Inlet. That's me. And that name is so old, they don't know. There's no years to figure out how old the name is. So I'm connected to these places and these things. And for a long time, I was ignorant of them, just like that boy who thought that we were all lazy drunks and lived on welfare. There was no welfare. Welfare didn't happen until 1958. And Kitkatla, when you go there today still and you get to the top and up on the pier, there's a sign that's about 6 feet by 8 feet that says this village is a dry village. And that sign has been there since I was a child. Well, newer signs now, but I never knew what a drunk was. I never saw one. Never saw liquor and never saw alcohol all the time I was growing up. So when I began to do my artwork, I wanted to educate people to the beautiful cultures, ancient cultures of the Northwest Coast. So I started creating eagle, whale, raven, wolf, and black and red. And then I realized one day, the only people really interested in these images are people who already know something about the culture. So I'm preaching to the choir. How do I reach people? How do I inspire people to learn what I've learned? How do I do that? And the answer didn't come in a flash. The answer came with my creating images that had nothing to do with the culture, like the face of Christ, like the creation of Eve, like Tuak, the white whale that was in Vancouver. So I began to pique people's interests. Then I learned I quit my artwork and I went fishing. And I always said, well, I didn't take a camera with me in 1970, or didn't do any artwork in 1979, but I did. I took a camera, and that little Pentax Spotmatic 2 helped me to look at the world in a different way, and look at the environment that I had always been taught to look at. And then I began to capture things with the camera that moved me and inspired me. And then I began to think, well, why can't I paint a tree? Why can't I paint the sky or the ocean? And the answer was, well, you can. So the style of work that I did changed. And one of the first pieces that I did was of Skedans in Haida Gwaii, and it was part of a series of villages of the coast that were important to me. And I went to this site, and there was one totem left, and it was almost falling over. And I knew images from the museum that this man, John Smiley, carved all of these totems that stood in old Skedans. And I sat there and watched him carve those. And it was very powerful for me. So when I went back to Skedans to paint Skedans, there was nothing there. And my friend Henry Nola was with me. And I walked over to this log that was out on the beach, and I sat down on the log and I wept. I just sat there crying at the loss of such beauty that no one will ever see unless they find the archives. And Henry took a picture of me while I was going through that emotional time. And when we came back, I'm looking through all these pictures, and there's Roy, and I knew what he was doing. He was sitting on that log, weeping, and he saw the village in the sky. And so that's what I painted. And the village is a ghosted village of ancient Skedans. And when people saw that, they saw today and they saw yesterday. So that's why you always see ghosted images, is to bring people to the knowledge there's more to this land that we really know, but we can learn. We can learn what is the name of the Skeena? It wasn't always called the Skeena. It's Ksien. Well, who are the people? Get Ksien. So it's for me, I'm more of a teacher than I am an artist. And I always have been. Thank you.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's probably a good place for us to bring this to a close. But Roy, is there anything else you want to say before I sort of launch into my closing comments?
Yes. We are all teachers. So this is a centering exercise that's used around the world. We are all teachers. We look to the east where the sun rises and that great ball of fire comes and gives us warmth and light. The color is yellow. The face is a child. The instrument is the bell. And what am I to do as a teacher? Keep my eyes and my ears and my heart open to the lessons that are available to me every day. As a child growing up and learning all of these things, I look to the south. The south is the way of the healer. The instrument is the drum. The color is red, the earth. In healing, all of our medicines come from Mother Earth. The face is woman. All of the people that I know in my life that were ready to move me and lead me into healing were women. And I am woman. My mother, I'm my mother. So as a healer and a teacher, I look to the west where the sun goes down. I'm sitting here talking to you with my eyes closed, but I can see. So in the darkness, we can still see. And what is this incredible thing that we have? Vision. We are all visionaries. So as a visionary, you depend on your healing journey and your knowledge journey, the teacher that you are and the healer you are, for your vision to be clear, to see the way you walk in the world. The human face is man. The instrument is click sticks, oldest musical instrument used in the world, used to keep time. The color, dark night, midnight blue. As a teacher and a healer and a visionary, I look to the north, the way of the warrior, the way of the leader. And I ask to stand in the strength and the truth and the beauty of who I am and speak to the world knowing that I am a leader and knowing that the teacher and all of the teachers and the healer and all of the healers and the visionary and all of the visionaries that I've ever known are helping me at this time to be the leader that I'm meant to be. So I sit here as a teacher and a healer, a visionary and a leader, and I'm speaking to teachers and healers and visionaries and leaders. And each one of those parts of us is very important for me, especially the healing journey, because I kind of sidestepped that one and didn't want to go into emotions and all of that stuff. And it almost killed me. So now I'm a warrior and a leader, and the color is white, the snows of winter, spring, summer, fall, winter. And so it's a delight to be here as those four: teacher, healer, visionary, and leader, and as an elder and a keeper of the knowledge, and to share it with you. So thank you.